Blind Encounter, submitted by Dorothy Tilbrook and Brian Yelds on the 15th of April 02 for the Victor Harbor Times newspaper. It was Encounter Day, the 8th of April, and they wanted to participate. Plagued by the normal frailties and afflictions of the aged, all had impaired vision. Some were totally blind. Many also had hearing difficulties. Like Flinders and Bedard, the vision-impaired group of Victor Harbor overcame these difficulties to produce an afternoon of feasting and entertainment excellence. Freshly gathered Australian flora, framed historic paraphernalia displayed on brocade table covers. Clanging ship's bells announced activities. Raconteurs related records from ship's logs and told true tales of the life of Anne, the wife of Matthew. Mayor Crompton expounded upon Victor Harbor's variety of visitors. And the feast, twin towers of croquembouche on silver platters, surrounded by delicious French fruit tarts and cheesecakes. Tiny meringues topped with strawberries and cream. Tarts caramel. Hot herbed flathead cocktails. Asparagus rolls, ribbon sandwiches and devilled eggs. Just some of the fare prepared by members themselves and decorated with handmade flags of England and France. Some could not attend, but dispatched their carers with contributions of food and fauna. A special event of which the vision impaired of Victor Harbor are justified in feeling proud.
200 years ago today, almost to the very hour, Captain Matthew Flinders in The Investigator and Captain Nicholas Baudin in the French ship Le Géographe met in what is now known as Encounter Bay. We celebrate this 200th anniversary in Victor Harbor. It has been a wonderful weekend for the whole town and the people who have been taking part in it. I am not going to talk to you about the voyages of Flinders and Baudin because we have already spoken about those, but I'm going to talk to you about the lady in waiting who was Anne, Flinders' wife. Anne Chapel and Matthew Flinders were childhood sweethearts. She was a very close friend of Matthew's sister. They were married in 1801, just 9 weeks before Flinders left in The Investigator. The ship had been made available to him by Sir Joseph Banks to make the exploration of New Holland, or the Great South Land, as Flinders thought of it. Matthew had hoped to take Anne on the voyage with him, and he was unaware that at about that time they had put a new bylaw into the British Naval Act preventing the passage of women on naval ships. This meant, of course, that Anne could not accompany him, and she spent 9 weeks with him. They may call it perhaps a long honeymoon. When the ship left Spithead, Flinders wrote to Anne and sent the letter to her by the pilot ship that escorted him to the British Channel.
My dearest Anne, write to me constantly. Write me pages and volumes. Tell me what thou wearest. Tell me your dreams. Anything. So do but talk to me and of thyself. When thou art sitting at thy needle and alone, then think of me, my love, and write me the uppermost of thy thoughts. Fill me 6 sheets, and send them when thou canst. Think only, my dearest girl, upon the gratification which the perusal and reperusal 50 times repeated will afford me, and thou will write me something or other every day. Adieu, my dearest, best love, Matthew.
Flinders called his men together the night that they left Spithead. He told them that they had all been selected especially for this voyage, that he was not going to go through their personal details as each of them knew their duties. But he wanted to point out to them that this was a very special ship. It was scientific, and it was to be kept as a shining example of British expertise and scientific progress. Their personal achievements on this voyage could guarantee their futures. I am not going into the details of the expedition because we have discussed that many times during this weekend. I'm going to move on now to the time when Flinders actually was taken prisoner at Mauritius. Flinders arrived in Mauritius on his return journey to England in the Cumberland, because the investigator had been declared unseaworthy. He had taken the Cumberland to go to England to attempt to get another vessel to finish the extensive exploration. Flinders arrived in Mauritius 2 days after the Legiographe had left. Unfortunately, Bourdin had died and been buried at Mauritius before Flinders arrived. Had the French ship still been there, history would have been recorded very differently, because the Legiographe had been helped so much by the British at Port Jackson, now known as Sydney Harbour. It had been brought into the harbour by a tug when it was seen to be in such difficulties. Its crew were so ill to navigate the ship properly. Many of the ship's crew were very ill and were placed into hospital in Port Jackson until they recovered. And Bourdin was extremely grateful to all the assistance that had been given to him by the British people in Port Jackson. He would have verified the fact that Flinders was not a British spy, but was on a scientific exploration the same as the Legiographe had been. However, this was the way it happened. Flinders was put into prison and kept in confined quarters for a couple of years. Then eventually he was placed on parole in the home of a French family. This family became very attached to him and looked after him extremely well and helped him to go on with writing and recording his maps and journals. While Matthew was away, Anne read and studied what she could of navigation, botany, and astrology. When Flinders finally arrived back in England after his release from Mauritius, he was met by John Franklin, who took him to the London hotel where he was staying near the British Admiralty, and went to bring Anne for a happy reunion. During the next 4 years, Flinders had a very traumatic time with regard to finance. They had to shift several times to cheaper residence. Flinders was promoted to post captain, but he was not recognised for any of the time he was at Mauritius as a prisoner. He was only awarded from the time of his release back to London. Matthew was offered another ship. Then it was suggested that he should complete the maps and journals before leaving again to continue with his explorations. He had to live in London to achieve this project. Many of the people who had been helpful and kindly to him in Mauritius came to England as prisoners of war. He used his influence to help them to gain release. Many of the crew of his ship, the Investigator, came to him for help, and very often it was financial help. Anne and Matthew never turned anyone away from their door, always at great expense to themselves. Their only child, Anne, spelt with an E, was born at this time. She was a very delicate child, and Anne needed much help to care for both her and Matthew. Flinders' health deteriorated, and in about 4 years after working in London, he was almost a bedridden cripple. Late in 1814, when delivery of his first copies of his journals was made, Anne took them to his bedside. Placing his hand upon them, she said, "Matthew, these are your journals." It is not known whether he understood what Anne had said. But the next morning, when John Franklin came to see them, Anne was kneeling by Matthew's bedside, holding his cold left hand. His right hand was resting on his journals. Matthew had gone. Anne had lost her husband, whom she adored, her childhood sweetheart, and she had been with him for such a short time. And John had lost his childhood hero, the man who had been his inspiration and his greatest friend. His daughter Anne, spelt with an E, was only just 18 months old, and she had lost the father she never remembered. John Franklin helped Anne arrange the funeral. Matthew was buried at St. James Church, Hampstead. After Matthew died, Anne returned to her hometown in Lincolnshire. She was only receiving a post-captain widow's pension, and she had great difficulty managing financially. In 1852, the New South Wales and Victorian governments decided they had never done anything to repay Flinders for his wonderful work in Australia, and they made a bequest of £100 each per year to Anne and the daughter for the rest of their lives. Anne, the mother, unfortunately died aged 79 years, a couple of days before the bequest arrived in England. Anne, the daughter, wrote to the two governments and accepted on behalf of her late mother and said that she would use the money to educate her son, William Matthew Flinders Petrie, as she knew her father would have desired. The daughter Anne wrote to the two governments and thanked them, saying that she would use the money to educate her son in the manner in which her father would have desired. This she did successfully, and her son finally became Sir William Matthew Flinders Petrie. He became a doctor of law, a doctor of literature, of science, and of philosophy. He was also an author, a musician, and the greatest archaeologist of his time. He was made famous by his excavations in Egypt. The chair of Egyptology was established in his name at the London University. In 1841, Sir John Franklin, who had been knighted by Queen Victoria and been appointed the Governor of Tasmania, erected a 25-foot tall monolith on a mountain just south of Port Lincoln on Eyre Peninsula, South Australia, in memory of Matthew. This being the first monument in his honour, and was unveiled by his beautiful wife, Lady Franklin. The Navy ships today still use the maps and charts prepared by Matthew Flinders, and they say that they are still spot on. Years later, when the daughter Anne went to St James Church in Hampstead to visit her father's grave, she found that the churchyard had been reorganised and many tombstones were missing, including that of Matthew. The actual site of his grave is still unknown. Every capital city has a bronze statue of Matthew Flinders. The one in Adelaide is on North Terrace. It would be fitting to quote Ernestine Hill's tribute to Matthew Flinders. She said, "In the cold, eternal bronze of statuary, he watches over the destiny of the continent that he named, the young explorer, figurehead of youth, once human, now immortal." Every school child knows his history, for he is history, sketching the great outlines of the Southland. But few know the story of a lifelong love of discovery, of the persecutions of a cruel fate that gave all only to take it away and send a broken cripple to an unknown grave, and crowned the ruin with undying fame when a century had gone. New Holland, the great Southland, Terra Australis, Australia. Thank you to Matthew Flinders.